Please be aware, in this podcast series we talk about all areas of safeguarding, which some people may find upsetting. So please make sure you're okay listening to today's topic. Be mindful of those around you, such as children, that you might not want to listen in. Hi, I'm SSS Safeguarding Director Sam Preston.
And I'm former head teacher and content author Sarah Spinks.
Welcome to today's podcast. Sarah is currently immersed in authoring, but I'm delighted to welcome back John Case, CEO of SSS Learning. Welcome back, John.
Hi, Sam. Delighted to be back.
Great. So today, John, we're talking about safeguarding training, specifically online e-learning. And having worked directly with schools and academies over the years, I've seen a definite change in terms of how they are delivering their safeguarding training to staff. You know, rather than relying on the old sort of in-person training, e-learning has really become a major source of training to ensure compliance with the requirements, hasn't it?
Yeah, it certainly has, Sam. We've been a major provider for many years, but certainly there's been a marked increase post-pandemic of e-learning being used by schools and academies. During that period, it not only provided the ideal solution at a time when direct contact was restricted, but it also gave them the opportunity to try a new way of delivering training, which I think they've seen the value of.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, John. And you know, there's e-learning, as we both know, there's e-learning and then there's e-learning. Quality, I think, is a big issue. And that's, I think, where the doubts creep in for schools, don't they?
Yes, very much so. If you think you're getting nothing more than a PowerPoint on screen, then that's hardly engaging. So schools have to compare and evaluate one company's service with the next and still be sure that they use an e-learning solution that will ensure that they comply with statutory requirements.
Yeah. And those fear factors often lead schools and academies to rely on external trainers, you know, or cascaded training or sending staff out on training courses. But, you know, we know that these traditional methods can be problematic. For example, how can you, be sure the external training meets the latest standards? The expertise is often lost in cascaded training. You know, it's often diluted through that process of delivery. And also, it really does offer little scope for any differentiation between that could maybe meet, ensure it fully meets the participants' needs. Change, I think, is sometimes hard to face, even if it will make things better again, both in terms of cost and effectiveness of learning. So, John, can you perhaps give our listeners, share your wisdom and give us some guidance and tips on what to look out for in an e-learning provider? You know, if they're looking to select an e-learning safeguarding training provider, what should they consider?
Well, I would advise you always ask your potential supplier to take you step by step through their system. Is it complex in terms of setup and administration? It certainly shouldn't be. Take a look at the quality and sophistication of the presentation. For example, we use 3D animation to provide engagement for the trainee. If it doesn't engage you, it won't engage your staff. So make sure you take a good look at the content. Make sure you get access to the whole system for as long as you need. Don't be guided to what companies just want to show you their best bits, their demo videos, if you like. And ask how often the content is updated and how you'll know if there have been any changes. The best systems offer immediate updates as legislation to statutory guidance and inspection requirements change, which, as we know, they do throughout the year.
Yeah, and that's really important. I mean, I'd add that it needs to be more than an annual update if you're looking at that, because I think that's because KCSIE, Keeping Children Safe in Education, that's updated every year. But it's more than just looking for that annual update. It needs to be a reactive, ongoing process throughout the year as any changes in requirements or new or even new emerging safeguarding themes as they emerge, which we've seen, for example, this year with patterning. Suddenly we're looking at patterning, and if anybody listening hasn't heard that term before, we have done a previous podcast on that. So take a look at that.
Yeah, well, to give you two more examples of that in this year alone was the update to prevent duty, which, you need to be sure your supplier has made that update. And another one would be emergency response strategies. Our course was released and a government update came out and was immediately updated. So you need to ensure your supplier is on the ball there, really. And I'd also caution that poorly designed and over-complex system architecture and content will often leave users disappointed, disillusioned, and more importantly, inadequately trained. This, click to the next screen, next, get to the quiz and pass, and actually have learned very little. And this problem starts with the system interface and the account setup, but it's an unnecessary issue if good system design is implemented, and this will overcome this problem and help, not hinder the user.
Yeah. So what about user engagement? I mean, I've seen, as you kind of alluded to earlier, I've seen eLearning, which to all intents and purposes is an extended PowerPoint presentation with voiceover.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. We've seen, photographs and a little bit of text on the side, just information thrown on the page, really. But the user needs to be fully engaged in the particular training course. And this can only be achieved by gathering content from key experienced practitioners from the education sector, combined with engaging written content and digital media that really only the best providers can put out in their training effectively. So, for example, I think I touched on before, we use 3D animation as a great sort of visual aid to engage the user. And we always support that by text and voiceover. And engagement is absolutely everything. The last thing users want to see is static content that they could have produced themselves. You've got to keep the user engaged so that they will learn. Poor content will basically equal poor learning and not the learning outcomes that we want. And given the subject area that we cover, it's critically important that when a learner goes through a system, a safeguarding system, that they must know their subject when they come out at the other side. It's not a box ticking exercise.
Absolutely. And just reflecting back on my experience heading up a specialist unit, there's also something about making sure everyone can access and understand the content. I'm thinking about different ability levels, experience, language requirements.
Yeah, that is really important, Sam. You need to look for providers who tailor their content to the roles that are accessing the training. Some of that might be specifically written to support governance and senior leadership. Some might be general awareness courses. Also, a good provider will not only offer courses that can be accessed by individual members of staff, but will also offer the chance to train as part of a group at inset. This is a great way to support mixed ability levels or any language issues. That getting together of a group promotes discussion, promotes debate. And if there are learners in a given setting that learn better that way, why not deliver the training as a group? And that's something that we've recently introduced in the platform, a group mode that allows you to go into the system, deliver to however many you want in the group. They'll collectively do the training and the assessment with individual CPD certificates fired out to their individual training accounts. So you've got a full evidence of training and engagement.
Yeah, that's a great option. I know in my unit, I had members of staff where English was their second language, and they would often find written text problematic, so the opportunity to learn as a group would have been so beneficial. And I'm also thinking about those opportunities that would lend to that discussion, as you said, and that's something I always advocate as part of training, because and it's also a good eye opener as well to perhaps reveal things or areas where you need to spend a little bit more time with staff.
Well, I'll give you an example. If you were perhaps a group of DSLs looking at our DSL training, we've got case studies section in our particular course. And you're asked as an individual to pause the video and consider what you would have done next. How great is that in a group where you can just pause it and somebody might say, well, I would have done this. And then another person might say, well, I would have done that. And then the group can discuss before moving on and look at what we suggest. But all promoting healthy discussion. And then, if one person happened to be wrong, that person will learn, in that setting rather than doing something alone. So
Yes.
I think it's really beneficial. This group training is excellent.
Yeah. So finally, John, can I ask about audit and tracking? What should you be looking for from your e-learning provider?
Well, audit can fall into two categories, really. Audit of the settings provision as a whole and an audit of training. And a good system should enable you to do both of that. It should have a good reporting element that's simple to use, that you can evidence who's done what and when. Tracking is crucial. Check if the system retains historical data and can not only produce certificates, but also has a robust training record. So it's useful for reporting to governance and also, crucially, as part of the inspection process.
Yeah, okay, that's great, John. Thanks for the tips. There's lots, I think, to think about. I think what I've taken on board is, in the main, is if you're potentially looking for a system, really think about the quality. That's the quality of the product, but also of the service that sits behind it. And I think sometimes that's the bit that you might not often think about. It's not just looking at a course, it's looking at all of that supportive bit that sits behind it.
Absolutely. Don't just tick boxes. Basically, seek out the quality, and you don't want to tick a box and then have a doubt in your mind that, well, do they really know that subject at the end of doing that course? You need to pick a provider where you can trust that and know that your staff or your team will have that knowledge. And that's crucially important. Box ticking must be avoided at all costs, really.
And it's actually one of the things that I know we've had great discussions, because a lot of service providers will accept a pass mark of 70% or 80% and whatnot. And I know at SSS Learning we always have that 100% pass mark, and we're often asked why. And my response to that is always, well, what bit of it, was it okay for the staff not to know or not to understand?
Yeah, we're talking about safeguarding, we're talking about child protection. That it's not I don't know, a maths test where if you get an equation wrong, you get an equation wrong. This is, if you don't know what you're doing in this area, it could have, critical, terrible consequences. And that's why it's so important to engage in a system that actually delivers proper training.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, if you'd like to know more on this subject, please do check out John's article. That's available on the SSS Learning website. So thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks, Sam.